Dr. Sadolsky, when I read your testimony, you're saying that the cartels are on both sides of the border, and they're tracking kids that come across the border, and presumably they're tracking them once they are released to somebody in the States?
Thank you for your question, Senator. So the cartels are bringing the children to the border in a very organized fashion using cloud technology to maintain a track of these children. Once they get to the border, they're told who to ask for to be their sponsor. The process works through, they go through ORR. The child says they identify the person they wish to be the sponsor. ORR is sending that child to an unvetted sponsor that is in connection with the cartels in Mexico. It's
So
the gangs.
if the child identifies, I would like Maria Lopez, who lives in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, to be my sponsor, there is no vetting. It's just presumed that if the child asks for Maria in Baton Rouge, that's where the child shall go?
There is no consistent vetting that is doing anything meaningful to protect these children. No, sir.
Now, is there a random sample of where, okay, we got a bunch of people asking, but we're going to at least check 10% of them to make sure that it all vets out? I mean, I guess I'm asking, if you know this, presumably ORR knows this, do we have a sense of why they're not acting upon this?
I honestly don't. I know that ORR is completely incompetent in the management of these children, and that's been reflected in the recent OIG report. I know that these children are being facilitated by the cartels to the border and then ultimately turned over to the transnational criminal organizations.
Now, you mentioned that
gangs.
there is a digital trail so that FBI could theoretically say, okay, there's a digital trail in the cloud.
Absolutely.
And we know this person has come across the border. She has asked for Maria Lopez, and she's now been assigned to Maria Lopez. Turns out Maria is not Maria. Maria is somebody else, and it's a gang member. But there's a digital trail here?
Correct.
Of what nature? I mean, Tara mentioned the Facebook, social media. I guess what I'm asking, what are the options and for us to actually, for the federal government to intervene to kind of interrupt some of this is what I'm after.
To examine the cloud data that's transferred between the cartels, the transnational organizations in Mexico, and the gangs that are in part facilitating the trafficking of these children in the United States. It's the demographic information of the child, how much the child needs to work to pay off, and also transportation issues or paths related to them being brought to the United States is what's being used.
I see. So they're emailing the people in Louisiana, D.C., you name it, wherever they end up,
Right.
to ask, to tell them, okay, this is how much long they have to be in service.
Right.
Now, Ms. Rodas, you had mentioned following people on social media. Is that commonly done, that when someone has been placed, there's some sort of social media surveillance of the sponsor?
Thank you for the question, Senator Cassidy. I wish they were following the children on social media. No, they're not. As you may know, Secretary Becerra has said many times, so has the director of ORR, once children leave the custody of HHS, no one is responsible for the children. They're not following up. It was just a fluke that the case manager saw that they had changed their profile picture on WhatsApp. So it's shocking to believe that case files between the case manager and the sponsor are shared on WhatsApp. The guy just changed his profile photo before he forgot to delete the case manager from the file, and she saw it.
Got it. Secretary Harris, now it's my understanding that when ORR sets up a facility, it is supposed to be in accordance with state law.
That is correct.
Now, and it has to be licensed by the state and meet the requirements of the state.
That is correct. However, we know in the state of Florida that they were not cooperating with our government, with the
Now,
Department
can I
of...
ask you, if Secretary Becerra were here, I wish he was, would he allege that Florida made it tougher for these facilities relative to a group home that would be for troubled children coming off of addiction, or were the requirements for the ORR homes the kind of standard requirements the state of Florida has for facilities for minors?
They would be the standard requirements for any home serving vulnerable youth.
And those requirements are for their hygiene, for their safety, for adequate medical care. These are just things that we would expect routinely, correct?
Yes.
And when you say, I'm just kind of dumbfounded that the federal government would not comply because they're supposed to, are you able to then go in and audit the facility to say, listen, you haven't really been transparent with how you're doing this, but we have the obligation to make sure that the kids are being held safely, securely, et cetera. Do you have the ability to go into the facility and audit?
You are absolutely right in terms of where the breakdown starts. Once we start the process of trying to go in and ask questions, that is where we get stonewalled from the facility under the direction of ORR. It would be difficult to get critical incident reports. It would be difficult to get access to some of the records. And moreover, we had a child die in one of the facilities in Florida, and we wanted to go in to conduct interviews of the kids, and we could not conduct those interviews until they got releases from ORR. So that is atypical for a facility licensed by the state of Florida.
So I guess one more question on this. If you showed up at the door and just wanted to make sure that you're not overcrowded, for example, that you meet the fire code, that all the things that you know that have to be done for any public building, that the doors open out, they don't open in, all that sort of thing. Would the fire marshal be allowed in, or would the Office of Public Health be allowed in to inspect? Or have you tried this?
They absolutely should under normal licensing and coding regulations. Again, however, our experience in Florida was when those types of asks were made, depending on the situation, they would have to get clearance from ORR.
Okay. Ms. Rodas, let me just say that in Help Committee, we've learned that the ORR continues to give contracts to contractors who do not have a child welfare background. Okay, and Ms. White, I think you probably relate to that. And so I sent a letter to one such contractor who has ties to a government defense contractor who was accused of abusing unaccompanied children in 2018. Now, Ms. White, can you give me do you have any conjecture of why they would continue to contract with contractors who have shown that they are not training people and that they've even been associated with abuse?
Yes, that's a great question, because also Cherokee Federal, this was the first time that they were in charge of child welfare. Again, I was not given the contract. I asked for it repeatedly. It is a taxpayer-funded document. We should all be allowed to view that, but that was under close hold and not given to me. But what I can say is that the Cherokee Federal contract at the site that we were at in particular, that was a no bid contract. So that was given, there's a justification that's done and was given automatically to Cherokee Federal. So they never had to actually compete for that contract.
Now, no bid contract, are there set aside for Native Americans? I mean, your Cherokee suggests that it's a Native American tribe.
Right, it does. It does. But at the dollar threshold that it was at, because this is a $700 million contract, I find it very unlikely that it would have been a set aside, although it could have been, but it was a sole source award.
Now, if it's you're in procurement, so if it is sole source, I'm unclear, is this politically motivated? Or, I mean, is it somebody's brother-in-law? You know what I'm saying metaphorically. How did this
Right.
$700 million for sole source for somebody who's previously been responsible for other abuses? I'm just scratching my head here.
Correct. It's shocking, and then I know that Cherokee Federal was also awarded the Afghan refugee contract following their performance at the Pomona Fairplex, which was dismal. However, we understand that they received, on their CPARS rating, they received top marks on their CPARS, and that's how they were able to secure this. But again, the contracting officer representative that was on site didn't allow me access to the contract. I could have helped them with identifying those failures and help them to create a plan to remedy those failures, but that was never afforded to me. So what they do is kind of keep close, lock and hold the contracting officer representatives that are on the site. to ensure that they're giving those ratings so that they can secure other contracts.
Senator Johnson?
And Senator Cassidy, Dr.